Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Christian. I am Ben DeBono. For this next round of videos, I'm going to be taking a look at 5 different adaptations of possibly the greatest of Shakespeare's plays, Hamlet. Starting out tonight, we'll be looking at Laurence Olivier's version from 1948. Then next time, we'll look at the Mel Gibson version, starred in, didn't direct it, from the early 90s. Kenneth Branagh's version from mid-90s, I think. I'm not entirely sure on the date on that one. Fourth up will be kind of a different adaptation. There's an Ethan Hawke version where it's sort of, from my understanding anyway, I haven't seen any of these, is like a sci-fi take on Hamlet or something, and that's from late 90s, early 2000s, I don't know. We'll see when we get there. And then finally, the BBC mini version from, I think, about 5-6 years ago, starring David Tennant and, I'm blanking on his name, Jean-Luc Picard. What's his name? I don't know. Patrick Stewart as Claudius. And that was from, I think, 2009. So we'll be looking at all 5 of those. Not really going to have any official release schedule for this little mini series, but I'll just kind of put them up as I get to them. And I am aware that there's a lot of other versions of Hamlet out there that I could have chose from. I just kind of chose these as a representative sample. Since I've been looking into it, since I picked these ones out, I've seen a lot of other versions that look interesting. A Russian adaptation that's supposed to be pretty good. I believe Derek Jacobi, or Jacobi, however you pronounce his last name, starred in one around the 50s or 60s or something as Hamlet. So lots of good stuff to choose from. But today we are looking at Laurence Olivier's version. And like I said a moment ago, I haven't seen any of these, so I'm watching it all for the first time. And I gotta say, I really, really enjoyed this first version. Laurence Olivier not only directed it, he also plays the starring role. He won both the Best Actor and I believe became the first foreign film, not foreign language of course, but foreign as in not made in America film, to win the Academy Award for Best Oscar. I'd have to double check on that one, but somewhere he's at least one of the first. And so very well received at the time, and for good reason. This is a movie that holds up very, very well today, and is an excellent adaptation. I do have a couple of problems with it. I don't think it's quite perfect, but I think those issues are easily overlooked when you consider just how much Olivier managed to accomplish here. So let's start with the bad stuff, just get that out of the way. I think my biggest problem with this film is also one of the easiest problems to overlook, and that's the voiceover narration that Olivier adds at the beginning. He kind of goes on with a few sentences here or there to kind of set the stage for Hamlet, which in and of itself I don't mind. It's the thing he says at the very end of this that kind of bugged me a little bit, where he says, "This is the story of a man who couldn't make up his mind." And that's a very valid interpretation of Hamlet. There's nothing wrong with viewing the play that way. My problem is that when that's how you introduce the film, you're forcing an interpretation on the audience at that point. Whereas this is a play that has been interpreted and reinterpreted for 500 years, and there's such a plethora of different ways to read it and to understand what this play is about, and just not only the play, but even right down to the character of Hamlet. And to kind of put that into a box is a mistake, in my opinion, and a pretty substantial one. Thankfully, minor in the sense that it can be so easily overlooked, and especially if you've read Hamlet before, seen the play, or if you're familiar with Shakespeare, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and all right, and then just move on. But where it bugs me a little bit more, and I think is worthy of some criticism, is that if this is somebody who's watching this film who isn't familiar with Hamlet and isn't familiar with all the different ways of reading the play, you've put that person into a box in terms of how he or she is going to interpret this story. And one of the great things about Hamlet is the way that it defies those interpretive boxes, or at least allows itself to be put into any number of boxes. And so it's far too reductive a moment, especially for any first-time viewers out there. The other big point of criticism that you can levy against this film is that it completely cuts out a number of characters. Fortinbras isn't in there at all, neither are Rosencrantz or Guildenstern. So they're completely cut out of this play. The whole political element of Fortinbras coming, to Denmark and everything is gone, gone, gone. Now, I do point this out as a criticism. I've read some of the critiques of this play, and I know that this is one of the areas, probably the main area, where Olivier's adaptation has been critiqued over the years. And I do agree that I think the flaw needs to be pointed out. I don't hold the film too culpable for it, both because, it's a long play. I believe Branagh's version is 4 hours, and this is a 2.5-hour version. So you're going to have to cut something if you want to get it down to that length. So unless we're making the argument that all adaptations of Hamlet should be in the 3 to 4 hour range, and that it's just outright inappropriate to whittle the play down to more of a 2 to 2.5 hour film, I don't know how much you can hold this film responsible for this. My understanding is that other versions of the film that are in that length, some of them do include those characters, but I would imagine that you're going to have to wind up cutting something else instead. So it's a choice of what, the choice is not if you cut something, it's what you're going to cut if you're going to make a play the play this length. And I think that to Olivier's credit, you don't really miss those characters as you're watching the film. It functions quite well enough without them. I suppose if you're a Hamlet scholar or something, it might rankle a little bit to have them gone, or if you're deeply connected with those characters or whatever. For myself, I've read the play a number of times and didn't particularly miss those characters, even though I was aware in the background of my mind that they were gone. There was never a point where it felt like the screenplay was stumbling over itself to try and cover up their exclusion. So, a flaw, but perhaps a necessary one, and one that the film does quite well at compensating. Okay, so what about the stuff that's good in this? Well, I think the thing that I enjoyed the most in this movie is the way that Olivier films the castle. The castle doesn't feel like just some simple sets that they threw up in order to film against. It feels labyrinthine. It feels huge. It feels, like this place just goes on forever. And you get a real sense of the idea that the castle is a type of place where there's going to be passages leading all over, the type of place where if you were living there, you would never really be able to nail down the geography of what this place is. And I think that, to me, at least in my viewing, really heightened some of the fantasy elements of the play, which I liked. Outside of the ghost, a straight reading of Hamlet really doesn't have much of the supernatural. But this gave the world of Hamlet a very fantasy-like sense, where Hamlet's own surroundings begin to reflect his inner turmoil of just passages that repeat themselves. There's one great shot where Olivier seems to, we seem to be following up a winding staircase. And then we get to the top and we're right back at the bottom again. And he kind of circles around like that 4 or 5 times. You get the sense of that this is a castle where you could climb and climb and climb and never get anywhere, which is exactly what is going on in Hamlet's mind, or at least one way of interpreting what is going on in Hamlet's mind. and just brilliantly done. The production values not only hold up, but really surpass what I think a lot of modern adaptations would try to do. I mentioned that for me it heightened the fantasy elements. You could also say it heightens the psychological elements of the play, in that there's a real inversion going on of Hamlet's character, where his psychological angst and turmoil has inverted itself and now is being projected onto the world. Olivier's performance is good. It didn't blow me away quite as much as I was expecting it to. That could have possibly been expectations, just because he's such a great actor. And he's going to take on Hamlet. This is going to be awesome. And not that he ever does a poor job; he does an excellent job throughout. But it didn't completely floor me like I was expecting it to. But again, that could have been just unreasonable expectations. The one part of the casting, the cast all the way through, is actually quite excellent. But the one part of the casting that's kind of interesting and leads to a point that some people have criticized this film on, but I don't think is necessarily a negative, is the casting of the Queen, who is Hamlet's mother, is played by an actress who at the time was 27, 28 years old, while Olivier was 40, 41 years old. I'll repeat that, just in case you think I misspoke. The actress who is playing Hamlet's mother is about 12 to 13 years younger than the actor who is playing Hamlet. And it's not quite as bizarre when you're watching it as it sounds when I just say it, but it certainly is a point that Olivier does on purpose to try and play up the Oedipal undertones, and even going further, just the incestuous undertones of the play. Ophelia and her brother, I want to say Laertes, I'm blanking on his name, so we'll just call him Ophelia's brother. They have a couple scenes where they seem to be getting a little hot and heavy, a little flirty and everything, kind of towards the beginning. And so this play really does play up the incestuous undertones of the material. And to me, though, I don't mind that, because it is a completely valid interpretation of the play. That stuff is certainly there. And unlike what I was just talking about a minute ago with the voiceover, this is a case where Olivier puts it out there. He emphasizes the elements from the play that contribute to that, but he's not forcing that interpretation down your throat in the same way. It's the difference between having that stuff there, casting this younger actress, having them act out some of the scenes in a way that does kind of have a sexual feel to them, and having a voiceover at the beginning where you're like, what Hamlet just loved his mother, was a real Oedipus thing going on. That's the difference between those two approaches, and what he does wrong in the one case with forcing on us the interpretation of this is a play about a man who can't make up his mind, he does right when it comes to the Oedipal incestuous stuff that is going on in the play. So overall, really, really enjoyed this. I would give it 4.5 stars as an adaptation. Hamlet, of course, gets 5 stars because it's one of the most brilliant works of Western civilization. But almost perfect adaptation, but not quite. A couple of flaws, but don't let that hold you back. And don't, I know people out there tend to be biased against old movies because, they're not going to hold up, they're going to be boring, the production values are going to suck. First of all, I don't think that's true in a lot of old movies. I think old movies are great. You should watch them and just get over that bias regardless of how you feel. But especially in this case, the production values not only hold up, but like I said, they are fantastic. I mentioned the castle. The ghost of Hamlet's father is just really well done. And some of the camera work there is really, really fantastic. And there are many points watching this where I thought, this is just so wonderful that they did this in an era before special effects, at least in the sense that we think of them today with CGI and all that. Or, even the 1970s, early 80s George Lucas, Steven Spielberg style special effects. This is a film that did it for real, and it looks just spectacular throughout the whole thing. So please check it out if you're a fan of Hamlet or just of good movies in general. I don't think you'll be disappointed. All right, so like I said, no real schedule for this series. I will be back whenever I get around to watching the next version, which is going to be the Mel Gibson version in which he plays Hamlet, and I'm quite curious to see that because although I enjoy Mel Gibson quite a bit as an actor, I just can't picture him as Hamlet, so we will see how that goes. Anyway, I'll be back probably within a week with that one, but for now, I'm Ben DeBono, and this is Sci-Fi Christian. Goodbye.